Dr. Prothero, he is a speaker at Caltech and a geologist, paleontologist, sorry. He earned his BA in geology and biology from UCR, and he was awarded the highest honors, Phi Beta Kappa, right? That's how you say that? There we go. And he earned his PhD from Columbia University. Personally, I consider him a prolific author with over 35 books, 6 of them being textbooks. Straight up, he writes the textbooks. So when you say, oh yeah, he wrote the textbook on that, he really did. And so he's got plenty of books, over 35 books, over 300 scientific papers. Over 300 scientific papers regarding, I cannot say it, I'm not even going to bother trying, please say, magnetostratigraphy. Thank you. Wasn't even going to try. I literally have a note here, ask him to say it. So, again, as if that wasn't enough, the 300 scientific papers, he's been been editor on plenty of boards for journals, very respected journals such as Geology, Paleobiology, and everyone's favorite Skeptic magazine. He is also a fellow of numerous societies, Linnaean, Paleontological, Natural Sciences Foundation, just to name a few. There's plenty more. And just a quick note, normally when I go through and I introduce someone, I condense a little bit. I had to condense a lot because there is plenty more that he is a fellow of, plenty more awards, plenty more academic accolades, one of which is in 2013 he received the James Shea Award from the National Association of Geology Teachers for outstanding writing and editing in geoscience. And so that's just one of many of his accolades and awards that he's gotten. And most recently, he just became a fellow of the prestigious Society of Riverside Atheist and Freethinking. Okay, never mind. I just made that up. But just some fun little facts also about Dr. Prothero. He was featured on the TV show, he was on Jeopardy! And he was featured on the TV show Win Ben Stein's Money, where he kicked that creationist's butt and won his money. What was it, $5,000?
$5,000.
About $5,000 he won on Win Ben Stein's Money. So he's definitely smarter than Ben Stein. And today he's here to talk to us about his new book, Reality Check, How Science Denialism Threatens Our Future. And I would go into it and tell you a little bit more about that, but it seems like you should hear that from him and not me. So please, everyone, give a big hand. Let me just back out some of this. No, this is your water there. Okay. Although I don't mind sharing. I mean, it's caring and all that.
Thank you so much, folks, for coming here on a Saturday, and I appreciate you showing up. I guess it was 2 years ago?
No, last year.
Last year.
Last year.
For Darwin Day?
Yep.
I was in Florida last year.
No, you were the weekend before when you
Okay. Can't keep straight anymore. So anyway, so as he mentioned, I had a book come out a year and a half ago called Reality Check that is doing pretty well in sales, and I'm going to talk about a few things that are in it. Let you look at, not all of it in the book, of course, can be talked about in a single talk. So I'm just going to give you a few aspects of it. I'll start out by a little bit of a teaser here. I'm going to give you a set of descriptors. You tell me if you think you can figure out who this describes. Okay? So, the community I'm talking about, the scientific consensus about this idea is accepted by 99% of scientists who work in relevant field. The scientific topic threatens their viewpoints, so they strongly oppose it. Their anti-scientific viewpoint is essentially promoted by websites and publications and right-wing fundamentalist institutes such as Discovery Institute, Seattle, often plugged on Fox News. The opponents of the scientific consensus can't find legitimate scientists with expertise in the field that oppose consensus, so they beat the bushes for quote-unquote scientists without relevant credentials. They propose phony lists of scientists who disagree with the consensus. They resort to taking quotes out of context to make their arguments and make scientists sound like they agree with them when they don't. They often look for small disagreements among scholars within the field to argue that the whole field therefore doesn't support its major conclusions. They pick on small errors by individuals to argue that the entire field must be false. They often take examples of side issues and trivial side points, red herrings, and you use these to drive people away from looking at the main point. They spend most of their time disputing evidence rather than actually creating evidence themselves. Okay? And finally, they cherry pick scientific data they didn't produce and often don't understand, show the opposite of what it really shows. They loudly claim their alternate theories, get paid hacks to put them on the media, so they get the public confused and doubtful, so that less than half of Americans accept what 99% of legitimate scientists accept. And in contrast, nearly all the other industrialized developed nations in the world, Canada, all of Europe, China, Japan, Singapore, virtually all of those, have no trouble with this issue. Okay? They treat it as a matter of fact in both their education and all their government policies. They're the only country that's the exception to that list. Okay? And of course, they're very tightly closed to the Fox propaganda ministry's news bubble, right, where they only listen to this stuff and they hear the same stuff over and over again. You might wonder what I'm talking about. Actually, it applies both to creationists and climate deniers. They both have exactly the same strategies and a lot of the same psychological patterns. And that's my theme today. Subtitled is The Holocaust Deniers Playbook. How these people do this, and then at the latter half, I'm going to talk about the last chapter in our book, which is why they think this way and what we can do about it. Okay? And actually, this whole strategy of denying what should seem to be an obvious reality to most of us was, in fact, really pretty much pioneered by Holocaust deniers. Which right after the Second World War began an active industry of basically denying the obvious. And we are now, of course, 70 years since the Holocaust, and most of the survivors are now dead. There's still a few still alive. And so it seems strange that if you even have a group of people who deny something where all these survivors are still here, and the Nazis themselves bragged about it. It's not like they pretended they didn't exist. And then, of course, if you go to a place like Iran, the entire country is run by Holocaust deniers. And therefore, all the people in Iran believe that stuff. Okay? And what do? They use the same kind of strategy. Quote mining, attacking little details, try to cast doubt on the bigger picture, cherry-picking data, making honest debate between scholars appears that we don't know what we're talking about, and basically focus on what we don't know as evidence they must be right because we can't get our story straight. Okay, that's a very typical tactic of anyone who wants to deny something that's fairly well established. Okay? And the other tactic is something, if you've ever seen this book, I highly recommend it, by Aristides and Conway, Merchants of Doubt. Very, very good book. It looks into how this kind of thing happens, not just in the topics I'll talk about today, but it actually goes back to another source of misinformation, the tobacco lobby. As early as the 1950s, the major tobacco companies were conducting their own research, and it clearly established that cigarettes were dangerous. And for the next 70 years, they successfully kept it either away from the American people or they managed to stop its effects. It wasn't until the year 2000 that Congress finally got the tobacco executives on the floor, and they had to use the RICO, the Racketeering Act that was used to break up the mafia, in order to get tobacco executives to perjure themselves and declare they didn't know the cigarettes are dangerous. That's how long this happened. And back in the 1950s, when the tobacco companies were realizing that they would have to fight this losing battle against the product they made, which was deadly to us, this a memo by the PR firm that they hired, Hill and Knowlton, wrote, "Doubt is our product." Right? Not cigarettes. Doubt is our product. Okay? So it's the best means of competing with the body of fact, okay, that exists in the mind of the general public. It's also a means of establishing controversy. Right? When you have a losing deck, you bluff. Okay? It's an old gambler strategy, right? So, that is a very common theme as well. Smoke screens. Keep people distracted. You know, look over there, and then you do something over here. Okay? Or focus them on something that does not steer them toward what the really serious issue is. Okay? We all know this. The creationists are famous for this, right? When the creationists get beaten in court, what do? They change their clothes. Right? They become less obviously religious, but they go back to the same old stuff. Right? So when they lost in the Supreme Court, they started intelligent design movement. When that lost in 2005 again, now they have this teach the controversy and these other types of strategies where they more and more hide their religious motivation in what they're doing. Okay? The same was true, as I'll show you in a moment, with all the various strategies employed to keep people from understanding climate science. And the man who says it best is ironically Frank Luntz. Some of you may know his name. He's got devil's horns in his head as far as I'm concerned. It's sold out as many ways as he can. He is a pollster who's very good at messaging, framing the debate in such a way that bad things sound good, which is a great PR strategy, but it's not very honest. Okay? This is what he wrote when he was a member of the Bush administration. The scientific debate is closing against us, but not yet closed. There's still a window of opportunity to challenge the science. Voters believe that there's no consensus about global warming within the scientific community. Should the public come to believe the scientific issues are settled, their views about global warming will change accordingly. Therefore, you need to continue to make the lack of scientific certainty a primary issue in the debate and defer science to ethical field. Certainty doesn't exist in science, okay? That's a myth, right? We have things that are 99% confidence levels, right? If you jump off the top of this building, I'd give you some confidence levels, you will be killed, all right? But that certainty does not exist in science, and that's something that the non-scientists use as a strategy, okay? And then, of course, the smoke screens are all well paid for by whichever large organization that benefits from confusing the public. Those of you who've dealt with creationists, as I have for now 35 years, know that the biggest problem you have with them is what's called cherry picking, right? Quoting out of context. You grab a document, find a little quote that fits what you want to say, chop it out, and then throw it out to somebody who's on the other side and say, oh, well, this scientist said this. Of course they didn't say that. You took away the key phrase, okay? But they usually either don't know or don't care that they're doing this. And so we all know this, right? They cherry pick data out of context and all the rest. You've heard about, for example, they'll take one anomalous radiometric date and say, oh, therefore all radiometric dating is useless. Okay? Climate deniers the same way. Okay, here is an older curve showing the general trend of temperature over the last century now. More than a century in that plot, actually. And each individual year is shown by a blue dot, and as you see, it's very noisy data. And any real scientist looking at data will say, well, you can't take any one point as representative because it's got noise in it. Okay? But the cherry pickers will do this. They'll take this anomalous year, 1998, that high blue point there, which is way off scale, and they'll say, oh, well, climate has been stable since 1998. Well, climate warming has paused. We'll hear this said by them all the time. Okay, and it hasn't died now, even though it's now 17 years later. Okay? And of course, you know that's dishonest. You can see it right away if you look at the plot, because you can't trust individual data points. Right? You cherry pick this point, obviously, any next 2 or 3 data points after it will look like they're not as high, because that's an anomalously high point, and that's not honest to take that data point. So the minute you hear that magic number, 1998, you know the person's lying to you, because they deliberately cherry picked a data point, okay, that is anomalous and not normal, right? A real scientist, not a climate denier. This is what's called a 5-year running average here in red. So it smooths out all the noise and the wobble. And that 98 data point, by the way, you know why it's anomalous. If you guys were here in 1998, remember we had a record El Nino in 1998, which brings a lot of heat into the system. Okay, that's why it's anomalous. It has nothing to do with global climate. Okay, so I replotted that myself here. There's a 98 peak, but actually all of the last 10 or 15 years have been right about that value or higher. I haven't replotted it recently. That ended in 2010. We're up here now in 2014. And you'll still hear people say, oh, climate hasn't warmed since 1998. It's plain bullshit. Okay? All right, so here's another way of doing this, right? Here are the real data, which are noisy, of course. It doesn't go past 2013 in this case, but you get the general point. And you can see, if you're climate denier, you put a lot of little short trends in there and can play with the data you want. You can manipulate data in lots of ways, but they're not honest ways to do it. And as you see when you get the red line here, so here's the so-called global warming deniers, skeptics point. And then what it really does is that it's obviously an overall trend. You cannot look at little segments and have any meaningful conclusion. Okay? And that also, by the way, is false to begin with because the data set is incomplete. The reason it seems to plateau a little bit since 1998 is partially because we didn't have any good weather stations in the Arctic that were monitoring it. It's very hard to manage from a weather station in the Arctic. And so our Arctic data set was underrepresented. The Arctic, of course, is where the change is happening fastest right now. And that would, of course, make a huge difference what we see. Okay, when the red is now adding the Arctic data, you see all those peaks are much higher. So at the same amount of time, and the red trend is very different from the trend without the Arctic data. Finally, remember that when we talk about air temperatures, which is what those plots are, those aren't really the bigger picture. Because air temperature in the atmosphere is only about 2% of the total places where heat goes. It's like almost 95% in the oceans. Okay, 93%, excuse me. Right? And the oceans are warming now too, which is what's really scary, because oceans don't slow down once they get going. All right? Now, all those things make a lot saying, okay? And here's the plot. I just pulled off last week from the new data, as you heard, 2014 shattered all heat records. There's 2014 up there, okay? There's the 98 peak we made such a fuss about. So you see, yes, there's noise in this data, but even the high peaks are going higher than any 98 value. And here's a plot showing just how much it's warmed in all various parts of the world. Notice mostly in the Arctic, and but all the continents, with a couple of minor exceptions, are warmer now than they've ever been before. Okay. Now, let's put a little bit more climate into this before I get on to our next theme here. You'll hear these people say, oh, well, climate is highly variable. You know, there were warm periods in the past. There were cool periods in the past. Of course there were, right? As a climate scientist myself, I published books on climate science. We know this, right? And they give us no credit for knowing that we know something about Earth history in the past. We know that what's going on right now is not part of normal variation. So if you run into some climate denier who says, oh, it's just climate variation. No, we know what normal climate variation is like, and it's not anywhere near that. Okay? We know that, especially, this is a famous data set from a core that was drilled in Antarctica called the Epic 1 core. It goes back 780,000 years, almost a million years in one ice core. All right? And it recaptures, and it doesn't go all the way back as far as it goes, but it captures the glacial and interglacial cycles, 6 of them. Okay? And you look at these peak warmings of interglacials, at no time did they ever get above 280 parts per million CO2. Here's where we are now. 400 parts per million CO2. At no time during the warmest period, the last 2 million years, was there ever as much CO2 as there is now. Okay? And then the last time there was much CO2 in the air, dinosaurs roamed the planet. Okay? You'll see another example, cherry picking again from climate science. They'll say, oh, well, during the medieval warm period, there were settlements in Greenland, and they were able to grow plants in Greenland, all stuff. That is all true, okay? About 950, about 1250, there was a slightly warmer set of conditions in the northern hemisphere, Europe and North America, okay? But not anywhere else in the world. In fact, the actual average over the world is cooler. Okay, so you can't use that. You're not talking about worldwide, you're talking about local. And to show you what the medieval warm period looks like, here's the medieval warm period. There's the peaks of it right there. There's where we were when this plot was done years ago. It's way off scale. Okay, there's no comparison, right? Anyone saying that does not know what the data look like. Okay, so our good friend Neil here, science is not there for you to cherry pick. All right. Something I always get frustrates the heck out of me when I deal with creationists, some of you may have run into this too, debating religious people especially, the refusal to change, fix mistakes, okay? If you're wrong in science, you're supposed to basically change your tune, right? If you don't change your tune, you're not doing science anymore, okay? And yet, of course, as all of us know, you debate a creationist, the arguments are all the same old tired ones they've had for 50, 60 years or more. And they never change them, even though they've all been debunked. Because their audience doesn't give a damn. Their audience doesn't understand it. Okay? In most cases, like the third law, second law of thermodynamics, how many times you guys have heard that, right? And it's been debunked. Does it ever die? No. They just keep on using it. Okay? And the global climate deniers, same thing. The pause is 98. It's dead. It's completely falsified. They don't drop it. It shows up all the time. The medieval warm period you just mentioned, climate models aren't perfect. They never fix their mistakes. That's not a scientific activity. That's PR. Okay, that's propaganda, right? And there's someone who would know something about that. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. You knew what he was talking about because that's Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, who was the pioneer of propaganda. Okay. Or here's another modern Goebbels, Karl Rove. Okay. As you might remember, during the peak of the Bush invasion of Iraq, they were talking about how they were remaking the world, and the famous quote from Karl Rove, that's not the way the world really works anymore. We're an empire now. We create our own reality. Okay? Even in context, it's the same thing. Okay? So here he is arguing with Plato. We surely agree that truth can be repeated by the repetition of a lie. Okay? Create our own reality. I mean, that should be a flashing light for most of us. You can just basically redefine what the world is and isn't. Okay? I love these are quotes that I picked out from my books, epigraphs. Philip Dick, you might remember him as a famous sci-fi author. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. Okay? Aldous Huxley. Facts do not cease to exist because they're ignored. Thomas Sowell. For every expert, there's an equal and opposite expert. For every fact, there's not necessarily an equal and opposite fact. Okay? Daniel Patrick Moynihan used to be senator of New York. You're entitled to your own opinion, You're not entitled to your own facts, okay? John Burroughs, a great conservationist, to treat your facts with imagination is one thing, but to imagine your facts is another. And finally, the great wisdom of Bill Maher, what's real is real, and like it or not, no one can change nature reality, except, of course, with mushrooms. Now, those of you who've dealt with creationists know this is another common tactic they use when the scientific community says they're wrong. They find their own scientists, usually by buying them, okay? Simple as that, right? They create lists of scientists who don't agree with evolution, lists of scientists who don't agree with climate change, okay? And when you look at those lists, it's all smokescreen, right? You analyze who's on the list. Well, you can make a list of names of anybody. It doesn't have any relevance to whether they're qualified to say anything or not, okay? For example, as you know, the creationists have done this all the time. They often list their scientists. I mean, Ken Ham, a year ago, when he debated Bill Nye, had 3 or 4 of these creationist engineers on his presentation, as if that somehow gave him credibility. Not one of them had any relevant training in evolution. No one ever mentions that, okay? Right? And they'll put up these lists of people with PhDs. Well, a PhD only qualified you to work in the field in which you were trained, okay? I have a PhD, but I wouldn't try to do nuclear physics, okay? And yet they put all these people who are physicists and engineers and all these people who are not evolutionary biology, paleontologists, and say, oh, they don't agree about evolution. So what? Okay, you wouldn't ask them to fix your car or write a symphony. Their PhD doesn't make them an expert there either. So why are they relevant to talking about evolution? Okay, you don't become smarter, actually become dumber when you get a PhD because you get so narrow. Right? All right. And if you've ever watched the NCSE up in Oakland, they have what's called Project Steve. You can Google it on their website. Where they constantly keep track. They have a list of all the scientists, and they're all with PhDs in relevant fields of evolutionary biology. And the only ones allowed in this list have first names of Steve, Stephen, Stefan, Stephanie, or on some cognate, which is like 1/10 of 1% of all the possible names of people in the world. And yet their list of 1,100 Steves is greater than the entire list of creationist scientists. Okay, because you can't ever count how many there actually are on real scientists. The same strategy is shown by the climate deniers, right? When they get in a tight corner, they find somebody who agrees with them, okay? And this usually means bribing them, all right? So back in 2007, right after the IPCC report came out, okay, which won the Nobel Prize, the American Enterprise Institute, which is a right-wing commercial lobby, offered 10,000 plus expenses to any scientist who would contradict it. You know, just buy your scientists right off the shelf, right? Expert witnesses like they do in court, okay? Senator James Inhofe, now in charge of the biggest environmental committee in the Senate, scary thought right there, has his famous list of 400 scientists. You break it down, it's TV weathermen, okay? TV weathermen are not climate scientists. They don't do research in climate. What does it take to be a TV weather person? You gotta look good on camera and read a teleprompter. And maybe you know a little bit about meteorology, okay? I teach college meteorology. I wouldn't trust these people any further than that, okay? And then the rest of them are all amateurs, denialist people. There's not a single real climate scientist on that list. Because they don't have it, okay? The more outrageous one called the Oregon Petition, this Robinson family down in tiny little Cave Junction in southwest Oregon. You know, 30,000 list of names. It sounds impressive. They break it down and realize it's full of fictional names. Mickey Mouse is on there, for example. Cartoon characters, duplicated names, corporate names. There's hardly any real scientists on the list. This is a great PR strategy, but it's not the way science is conducted. We don't conduct lists of science. There's our friend James Inhofe. The reason I'm not impressed with science and scientists is because the Lord Almighty can overcome all those so-called facts in the blink of an eye. Actually, it raises another issue I'll get to in a moment. Okay? Or here's a famous quote from Grandma Day, it was a week ago. Only in America do we accept weather predictions from a rodent, but deny climate change evidence from scientists. Very strange contradiction. Okay? Or this little cartoon here, it really says it very nicely. Whoa, look at the snow, right? This is what it's snowing outside. Where's the global warming? Ha ha ha. So much of that global warming stuff, eh? First of all, the correct term is climate change, and the increased severity of storms worldwide is all indicative. No preachy science junk on Saturday, okay? How long is this anti-knowledge trend going to last? As long as there's an internet. Okay, so this is what you see, especially on the Fox propaganda ministry. People say, oh, I've got a meteorologist who anticipates climate change. So what? Meteorologists aren't climate scientists. The public doesn't get the difference, okay? And the big difference, of course, is that climate is a long-term average, right? It smooths out all the noise, which is why it's much better understood and more predictable. The than weather. So when they say, oh, we can't predict weather, weather and climate aren't the same thing. We can predict climate because it smooths out the noise and it's much more reliable, right? So climate is by looking at a calendar, let's say, predicting the general patterns that be for there. Weather is actually looking at the thermometer the same day to see what it really is. Or here's our Bart Simpson making the point again. Climate and weather are not the same. Okay? Next time you hear someone saying something about snow outside, well, not here obviously. Okay, that's the first thing you say. Climate, weather are the same. So weather makes snow in warm climates and in cold. Okay? And I'll say a few more things about climate. And by the way, if you're interested, I did this little booklet here for the Skeptic Society, which has been published a couple of years now, Skeptic's Guide to Global Climate Change, which has all these arguments and more in it. It was published originally as an issue in Skeptic Magazine, and now they've published it as a booklet here for classroom use. I had some extra copies, so I brought them along. If you want to grab one after we're done here, take it with you. Feel free. I have quite a few, I think. All right? You get people say, oh, well, yeah, maybe the climate's changing, but really, did humans do it? Okay, that's often the sticking point. They'll back off a little bit, then they'll sit on the fence and don't want to blame humans, okay? Let me tell you what the evidence for that is, in case you get an argument from these guys. First of all, forget how many satellites we have in the sky above us and what they can see, okay? Not just NSA spy satellites, okay? They are measuring all the time where our heat is coming from, where the heat spots on the Earth are, and where the CO2 is coming from. They can see the carbon dioxide come from our power plants in space, and they can measure it. And that's what they do, okay? And when we actually take gas samples of what the atmosphere is doing, it has the chemical signature of fossil fuels. It's not natural, okay? You can tell the difference. It's what's called carbon-13 rich. Here's the plot. And the carbon-13 trend over the last 50 years is exactly the same as the warming trend, okay? Because all that gas came from burning fossil fuels. Okay? You'll hear say, oh, well, maybe the sun got warmer, that's why climate's changing. Okay? Or maybe more cosmic radiation. There has been no significant increase in cosmic radiation. Volcanic eruptions actually do the opposite. When a volcanic eruption happens, they chill the planet for a few years. They don't warm it up. Okay? So that doesn't solve it at all. And they're tiny, right? A single eruption, maybe a third of 3/10 of a billion tons of carbon, where we release almost 100 times that much of CO2. Okay? Methane is a possibility, but it's a very scarce gas right now. One day when more methane comes out, we'll be deep shit. Okay? And if they say the sun is warming, they're lying to you. Okay? That's falsely. There's the data. Okay? Solar activity in blue here has been declining for the last 25 years. And there's what the climate and warmth and temperatures do. They're going the opposite direction. No connection. Okay? Oh, what about other things? Okay, we ruled out solar heating, cosmic rays, volcanic gases, and methane. We could also look at things like, here is the atmospheric CO2 level, CO2 level, and they actually match the pattern known to have been burned through the Industrial Revolution. Okay? The final test, this is what was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back as far as climate science is concerned, is they said, okay, the really good way to test this, independent of what we can see on ground, is to compare the trend in the stratosphere with the troposphere. The troposphere is the area we're breathing in right now, about 30,000 feet up towards the stratosphere. And if the heat is coming from the ground, the troposphere should warm, the stratosphere would then be cooling to compensate. But if the heat is coming from the sun, the stratosphere would warm, and the ground would not get as warm. Okay? And sure enough, exactly happened, right? The stratosphere is cooling, and then the troposphere is warming. Back in the 1960s now, we have data to show this. Okay? That's fingerprints of humans right on the data right there. Okay, so climate change then is established as far as any idea in science, as well as gravity or evolution. Climate change is happening, okay? There's nobody in the climate community who takes it seriously anymore who doubts that. 97, 99%, I mean, here, the one is statistic, 33,000 peer-reviewed papers of climate change over this window of time, and less than a fraction of percent that deny that humans did it. And so there's the scientific consensus. Another study giving 97% of scientists agree that humans do it. But there's the public's idea. Maybe 45% of the public in the survey that was cited here. Let me switch over to an irreplaceable episode of John Oliver's show, which some of you might remember. Now, I guess it's going for a second season. Okay, oops, hold on here again. Where is there? Is that my browser? No. That's Chrome. That's it. Here we go. Now, let's play this. It says it better than I can because John Oliver.
That blue thing Bruce Willis is always trying to say.
Starting again.
This is always trying to say. You may know it as that blue thing Bruce Willis is always trying to say.
We're not in the right frame. He's fixing it. Sorry. I'm a Mac person myself, so.
Apparently he wants to stay in the PowerPoint.
I want to leave my PowerPoint. See, on the Mac, I just click on that hot link up there, pops right over to the browser. That's what I do when I teach. So we will get it fixed here. The only time I'll do the interruptions, I couldn't resist playing this clip.
I'm sorry.
If I have to crash PowerPoint, I can find my way back into work.
And that's why.
All right, now go ahead and hit it in full screen.
Or from its famous collaboration with wind and fire. Or just simply as that place where George Clooney lives. Anyway, the Earth had some genuinely bad news this week.
A White House report that says global warming threatens every part of the U.S.
This isn't something in the distant future. Climate change is already affecting us now.
Now. Smart move, Obama. That is a key shift in how to talk about climate change, because we've all proven that we cannot be trusted with the future tense. We've been repeatedly asked, don't you want to leave a better Earth for your grandchildren? And we've all collectively responded, fuck 'em. Incredibly, this latest damning scientific report may still face an uphill climb with some of us.
There's that Gallup poll that came out last month, which found that 1 in 4 Americans is skeptical of all the effects of climate change and thinks this issue's been exaggerated.
Who gives a shit? That doesn't matter. You don't need people's opinions on a fact. You might as well have a poll asking which number is bigger, 15 or 5. Or do owls exist? Are there hats? On climate change should not be whether or not it exists, it's what we should do about it. There is a mountain of research on this topic. Global temperatures are rising, heat waves are becoming more common, sea surface temperatures are also rising, glaciers are melting, and of course no climate report is complete without the obligatory photo of a polar bear balancing on a piece of ice. The only accurate way to report that 1 out of 4 Americans are sceptical of global warming is to say, a poll finds that 1 out of 4 Americans are wrong about something. Because a survey of thousands of scientific papers that took a position on climate change found that 97% endorsed the position that humans are causing global warming. And I think I know why people still think this issue is open to debate, because on TV, it is. And it's always 1 person for, 1 person against. And it's usually the same person for.
Bill Nye and Marshall Blackburn, welcome both of you to the press.
Bill Nye joins us now, along with climate change skeptic Mark Morana.
Joining me now to go head-to-head, Bill Nye, science educator and CEO of the Planetary Society.
In the crossfire, Bill Nye, the science guy.
Bill Nye, the science guy who believes in man-made global warming. Yeah, that's right. More often than not, it's Bill Nye, the science guy, versus some dude. And when you look at the screen, it's 50-50, which is inherently misleading. If there has to be a debate about the reality of climate change, and there doesn't, then there is only one mathematically fair way to do it.
Last Week Tonight presents a statistically representative climate change debate.
Good evening. Joining me tonight, a climate change denier and, naturally, Bill Nye science guy.
Humans are causing climate change?
No question. Wait. Before we begin, in the interest of mathematical balance, I'm going to bring out 2 people who agree with you, climate skeptic, and Bill Nye, I'm also going to bring out 96 other scientists. Please file in. Again, this is going to make the debate difficult. We shouldn't really be having it in the first place. But, so, representationally, climate skeptic, please make a case against climate change.
Well, I just don't think all the science is in yet. It's settled.
Okay, and what is the overwhelming view of the entire scientific community?
That's on YouTube. Yeah, just type in John Oliver, Bill Nye. That's all you have to do, and that will be the first hit. And brilliant, brilliant segment. It says it better than anything else can say it, so it's worth taking time to play it here. Apparently, we tried other YouTube links, and the Riverside Library has a filter for R-rated videos.
Yeah.
Well, you saw there were some swear words there, so somehow it got past. The other ones I didn't want to show did not want to get there. So that's okay. We'll go to edit mode and just jump down to it. I can find the slide pretty quick here.
Yeah.
All right, so I know that takes time, but it's non-wasting. Neil. Almost there. Okay, so that's slow. We're back.
There we go.
So there's the slide version of it, in case the video didn't work. Who gives a shit? You don't need people's opinion on a fact. And the rest of it. All right, so back to where we were now. Now, back to the point about quote mining. Okay, as you said, quoting out of context, famous example, as said, creationists do this all the time. ClimateGate, big fuss about the stolen emails in East Anglia Climate Research Unit. It's a good example of quote mining, right? They had thousands and thousands of pages of emails, and they managed to find 2 or 3 quotes out of context that sounded funny. And if you wrote any thousands of emails, then you found something that sounds funny, right? That's guaranteed, okay? For example, the phrase neat trick that was in there is not evidence of someone trying to trick you. It was not a conspiracy. The way scientists talk about doing a technique in a better way. That's a neat trick to handle data. Okay, that's what that meant, okay, in context. When I'm talking about hide the decline in that particular set of emails, again, that's talking about a fact that there's a set of data from certain tree rings that we know is problematic, does not agree with 99% of all the other data, and so we try to get rid of it and then use only data we trust. And that's what that phrase referred to. Okay, again, you'll get people quoting out of context, and it doesn't mean at all what they say it does. If you don't believe me, there were 6 different independent commissions. A huge amount of wasted effort on my part. Okay, 3 in the U.S., 3 in Britain. They all cleared. Didn't have any wrongdoing. Okay. You all know this. Creationists' basic strategy is evolution or salvation, right? It's false dilemma. Manichaean, black and white view of the world. You can't have one or the other in their minds, okay? And their typical strategy is they don't actually defend creationism, although Ken Ham got suckered last year when he did, okay? They attack evolution with the idea that if somehow they create doubt about evolution in your mind, that then you'll come to their side, because they view the world as only 2 sides, okay? But of course, it's not that way. As you know, the creationists come in many stripes, right? There's old Earth creationists, young Earth creationists, theistic evolutionists, right? So even if you doubted evolution, would you become a young Earth creationist automatically? No. Okay, it's not black and white, okay? Climate deniers do the same thing. They'll pick on what they think is a weak spot in climate data, like climate modeling, which used to be a weak spot, not anymore, okay? And they say, oh, well, we can't trust climate modeling, therefore let's not believe anything. Okay, that's the way they strategize it. And here I want to talk about what we call the burden of proof. For those who've ever been on a jury or know something about the legal system, right? The burden of proof. Who's got to prove something, okay? When Charles Darwin, we're celebrating his birthday next week, proposed evolution in 1859, the burden of proof was on him, okay? 159 some years of data have piled up since then. Now the burden of proof is the other way. Now the creationists have to undo every single piece of data in order to make us doubt evolution occurred, okay? And likewise with climate science. Climate science and the evidence of global warming goes back to the 60s, right? Gigantic amount of data, especially in the last 20 years. The burden falls on the denier to disprove every one of those. We don't have to deal with this one point only, okay? Or they look at small differences. They look for a maverick scientist who questions evolution. There are always a few crackpots out there, okay? Contrarians. And say, oh, well, he doesn't agree with evolution. So what? People are funny, right? Contrarians exist in every field, okay? And even if you argue and say, oh, well, one of those guys at Hadley wrote those emails must be corrupt. Does that make every other scientist in the world corrupt automatically? No. Okay, but that's the way they're looking at it, and that's the way they think, you know, that somehow we're all bad apples and make the barrel bad, okay? So even if there are a handful of scientists who doubt global warming, which there are still a handful like that, okay? That doesn't matter when the consensus, as you saw from John Oliver, is 99 to 77%. The burden of proof was on the minority. Okay. And this sort of raises a bigger issue here, okay? In Congress now, the usual thing for climate deniers to say is, well, I'm not a scientist. That should be the end of discussion right there. Their opinion is irrelevant at that point if they're not a scientist trained in the right area. And Barbara Boxer, our senator, is saying very appropriately, to those who say I'm not a scientist, that's right. You are not a scientist. You don't know. So listen to the scientists. Okay? And this raises another issue, which to me is really sickening. This little cartoon says it nicely. The plot idea. 97% of world scientists contrive an environmental crisis. They're exposed by a plucky band of billionaires and oil companies. I'm a climate scientist, okay? It's something I published in several times. And it really, really shocks me and discourages me to see how easily the public can think of scientists as bad guys. They can be get this idea that somehow we're in it for money. I've taught all my life, 35 years now. I've never made 6 figures in my life. Okay, most college professors either don't make that or just barely make it. Okay, if I had ever wanted to make money, I would run to oil. Okay, that's where the money is. Okay, all right. None of us who do climate research get money. It's worth talking about. If you write a grant, 70% of it goes to the institution. You don't get to see it at all. Okay, and most of the rest goes to expenses. You don't keep any money yourself. Okay, we don't get rich doing science. We do it because we love it. All right. Plus, science is all about disagreement, argument, debate. Okay, you never, can roll over any of the scientists without them actually seeing the data, looking closely. Right. We're the worst possible group to ever have a conspiracy. We can never agree on anything. My good friend Jim Powell, who used to be head of the Natural History Museum, says this very nicely in his recent book. Scientists show no evidence to be more interested in politics and ideology than the average American. Does it make sense to believe that tens of thousands of scientists have been so deeply and secretly committed to bringing down capitalism and the American way of life that they would spend years beyond their undergraduate degrees, working to receive master's and PhD degrees, then go to work in government labs or universities, flying the deep oceans, forbidden deserts, icy poles, torrid jungles, all for far less money than they can make in industry, all the while biding their time like Russian sleeper agents, an old spy novel. Scientists tend to be independent, resist authority. That's why you have to find them in the laboratory in the field as far as possible to pry eyes of a supervisor. Anyone who believes you can organize thousands of scientists in conspiracy has never attended a single faculty. It's the exact opposite of what real scientists are like. And yet, Inhofe and all these other people in the Republican Party keep this notion, which a high percentage of their followers believe, that somehow we can all conspire. And we can all agree that we're going to pull a big environmental hoax and we're all anti-capitalists, which is even more bizarre because they become in all political stripes. Okay, another strategy, the red herring strategy, right? Lawyers love to do this. Throw you a little red herring off in the distance and you look at that and you miss the main thing. You miss the forest for the trees. If you argue with creationists, they never argue about the central issues in evolution. They argue about little irrelevant side issues, most of which aren't even issues anymore at all. Like Haeckel's biogenetic law wasn't even true when he proposed it, okay? Let alone anybody take it seriously now. The peppered moth experiments, the Piltdown story, right? All that stuff is red herrings. It never focuses on the central data because they can't talk about central data because it's so strong, okay? And the same thing happens to climate skeptics, right? They ignore the direct evidence that we have been seeing all this time, from glaciers, from ice caps, from all the stuff that's happening. They just say, oh, well, that climate model didn't work. So what? That's one tiny little thing. It took the overwhelming evidence. So here we have our global warming evidence on the blackboard, and the skeptic says, look, right here in the sentence of the preposition. Here you forgot to dot an I. What a fraud. Okay, or here we go, the flight version, same thing. We're slowly being cooked in a pot. We're slowly being boiled in a pot. See, there's no consensus. So what we're really talking about has nothing to do with science at all. It never did. Okay? It's not about science. It's about PR. It's about winning publicity battles, right? And trying to influence voters to political inaction. Okay? And what you notice is there's a big difference between PR and actual science. Science, in fact, we shun PR. Most scientists don't like to have their names in the news, although their universities now push them to do it more and more. Okay? We tend to be like to be avoiding having big publicity. And you will never see creationists doing real research. Their research is all to be debunking evolution. It's not actual research that's creative in any sense at all. They've actually admitted this. If you Google the term wedge document, first hit you'll get is the document which, of course, Discovery Institute took down off its website, but it's all over the internet. You can't hide it anymore. And it describes their strategy for a PR battle to win the battle against evolution. Okay, the wedge that they're going to drive between science and society. That's what it is. It doesn't mention scientific research anywhere because they don't do scientific research. Okay? Climate deniers entirely outside the research community. They're all just bloggers and these various other people who pull stuff out of context, but they have never actually been in the field, collected data, learned enough of what it is to actually see what they're doing with stuff. Okay? Our real scientists have said we don't play PR games. We know that if our ideas are good, they will survive peer review. Other scientific reviewers, when they go to publication, will shoot it down if it's bad, and it will never get past a certain stage. Okay? We have no way to push bullshit on the public like that. It's a very harsh gambit. It's the only self-policing system out there. Okay? Everything else on the internet is unreviewed, unpoliced, right? Unfact-checked, and therefore probably not trustworthy. Okay? So here's our blogger here. I've done my research on Conservapedia. Okay? And then science says, that's cute. Now, to show you what this means in real terms, okay, here's a classic case of where a scientist did what science is supposed to do. Richard Muller is a physicist at UC Berkeley, very famous for several things he's done, was also a long-term skeptic of climate change. So the Koch brothers, ExxonMobil gave him tons of money to dispute and to discredit climate change. And they gave him money to go through all the data that temperature change over time. And then in 2011, when the Republican Congress Science Committee brought him on as an expert witness, they thought he would be a friendly witness because the Koch brothers paid for it. Okay? He got up in front of them and he said, nope, sorry, the data are right. Okay? The Goddard data are blue, the Hadley data are green, Noah's data in red, and his data are in black. Indistinguishable. Right? He was forced to admit the data say what they say. And then he had to backtrack to the position he'd been paid to say. Not many scientists are brave enough to do that, which I applaud him for this. But that's the way science is supposed to work. You're supposed to change your mind if the evidence demands it. Okay? Or, the more important thing is to understand where it comes from. Okay? And it's about money and power, of course. It's not about science. Right? As those of you remember Watergate, which a lot of us are too young for it now, the character Deep Throat in the film version certainly said to Woodward University, follow the money. Right? That was the way they finally cracked the conspiracy around the Nixon White House. Well, we all know there's tons of money in climate denial. There's tons of money in creationism, right? Answers in Genesis, Discovery Institute, Follows Interview, or Roberts. They have no shortage of money to fund creationism of all kinds, all right? And the climate deniers don't either because they have funders like the Koch brothers and like ExxonMobil. They go through the American Petroleum Institute and various right-wing organizations like the Marshall Institute. Famous document with a leaked memo that got out of their secret meeting in April '98. They met at the API, American Petroleum Institute's lobby in D.C. They planned a $20 million campaign to get respected scientists to cast down climate change. They had a PR effort going to lobby Congress. So when Hillary Clinton was talking about a vast right-wing conspiracy, she wasn't imagining things. It is a conspiracy. We have the documents to show they conspired to do this. Okay? And all of them, it's very easy now on the internet to look up the climate deniers in Congress and then find out who paid for them, who's their biggest donors. Without exception, they all take large money from energy companies, coal and oil. Okay? Usually their primary donors. Okay? So which makes more sense, right? Big oil companies are spending their obscene profits to bribe anyone they can, protect their profits against future liability, or the national regional environmental groups and the activists are speaking to the limited budgets. Somehow they've made a massive conspiracy with the scientists to cause a worldwide global economy crash, right? This is pretty bizarre that anyone would think that we have this kind of power or that we're actually well-funded compared to ExxonMobil and Koch brothers. Okay, now, in the book I talk about a bunch of other kinds of science deniers, not just creationists and climate deniers, although the two biggest groups right now and most politically sensitive, but they come in lots of flavors. Okay, science denial is not something that's rare. Humans are very good at denying what they're familiar with. Okay, very good book by Seth Caliban called Denying AIDS. And I wrote a whole chapter about what are called AIDS deniers. You say, what, an AIDS denier? Not what you think it is. It's people who deny that the AIDS virus is caused by, or AIDS virus causes the disease AIDS. Okay, HIV virus. Why would they do that, right? 2000, we had isolated it and coded it and everything. Because a small group of people don't want to believe it. And they use exactly the same strategy. Pulling contents, claim it's a conspiracy, looking for scientists, like one or two that doubt that HIV causes AIDS. They don't actually provide any alternative where AIDS comes from. That's just their position. Now you think, oh, how could this ever make any difference? From 1998 to 2006, the government of South Africa was run by AIDS deniers. And their health minister was called Dr. Beetroot because she was a witch doctor. And she had forbade any kind of AIDS medication or condoms or any kind of AIDS education. And millions of South Africans now have the AIDS virus, thanks to her and their drug. Okay? That's life or death we're talking about. Okay? Okay, lately this has gotten to be one of the hottest kinds of science now, the anti-vaxxers. Okay? Their bird has come home to roost. After years of getting our population lower and lower resistance to diseases, suddenly measles, which is probably the most contagious thing there is, not Ebola, which is not very contagious, but measles has finally broken out again. We had measles beat in 2000. It was gone from the U.S. We thought it was going to be gone forever. Sure enough, they got it back. Okay? What are they? A bunch of people, mostly mothers with children that have ASD. I have two that have ASD. Okay? And I probably was mildly Asperger's myself when I was younger. Okay? Who are searching for answers. That's where it comes from. It's emotional, not rational. Okay? And they don't like the idea that ASD is inherited. Okay? It's largely genetic. So they want to blame it on something, right? Blame it on something they did or something was done to their kids. All right? And that's what we usually do. They blame it on vaccinations. All right? So then the scientific community, the medical community, 99.99%, as you've seen in the news lately, pointing out that this is not true. Okay? What they'll do is they'll find a handful of cases that they claim are support them. They'll quote mine, they'll cherry pick. They play PR games, mostly for the web, right, which is a vast cesspool of unreviewed stuff. Okay? Plus people like Jenny McCarthy as sympathizers, right, who was powerful when she was on the View. All right? And the real problem, again, they're using the same false dilemma strategy. They don't like the idea that their genes probably cause their children to have ASD. Okay? So then they have to say, oh, well, it's the vaccines. Well, maybe it's the mercury that used to be in the vaccines, even though it's not in there for decades now. Okay? Whatever. They call it's called shifting goalposts. Keep, going on the same old thing without facing the real value. And so this now is in the news all the time. I just saw this the other day. There's a doctor saying, if you connect the measles, it spells out, my parents are idiots. Okay? This, I think, is the best visual metaphor I've ever seen for the measles outbreak we're getting now. And measles kills, by the way, and it's the most contagious disease practically there is. It's nothing to laugh at. Okay? It's really scary that we've got this monster back out of the cage after we had it in the cage in 2000. Okay? And the usual case they make is say, oh, well, ever since the introduction of these vaccinations in the 80s, we've seen the rise in cases of autism and ASD disorders. And that's what's called a false correlation. Okay? The two are occurring in the same direction at the same time. Therefore, they're connected. No. That's not necessarily the case. And I'll show you that because, for example, here's the rate of autism in organic food sales. Okay? Organic food sales that cause autism. Okay? What's happening is that the diagnosis of autism, and especially diagnosis of Asperger's, which I probably have, did not even exist until the late 1980s. And then it got more and more widespread over the course of about 15 years. That's what's the difference. The cases existed when I was a kid. I was never diagnosed. Okay? That's the only difference. It's just that the diagnosis finally emerged, and now more and more people are using it. That accounts for 100% of this rise in autism and ASD disorders. If you want to play this game, okay, as Orac points out, well, the Macintosh computer and the personal computer originated at the same time. They caused autism. Or the invention of the CD caused autism. Or the invention of the cellular phone caused autism. Those are all things that started in the late 80s, early 90s, right, and have been rising in use. And you could blame any of them just as much as you could blame the added addition of these vaccines. Or I love this one here. The rise in number of autism cases correlated with the rise in genetic pregnancy. She's the cause. Okay? Now, all these people are not just a group here, and a group there, and a group there. They're almost all the same people, right? They usually come very popular. It's the same package. So the creationist websites like Discovery Institute, if you read their page, there's actually not that much in evolution anymore. It's mostly in climate denial. They play the same games with both things, okay? We all know the GOP platform is both full of climate denial and evolution denial, and lately been anti-vax, especially when two politicians spoke out last week with stupid anti-vax comments they've now managed to backtrack from. Okay, and as you might remember, in the early days of AIDS, the Reagan administration did zero about it. Right? They were in denial that AIDS was a problem. Okay, and they all come from this common engine of Fox propaganda ministry. Okay, now the scary part of this is that what it does in this country is a chilling effect on scientific research. Jim Powell calls it a new inquisition, where when Bush had power, of course, scientists were actually squelched and the work was edited and suppressed, okay? And lately what's really even scarier is they are now attacked, physically as well as scientifically as well as politically, okay? There have been death threats against climate scientists in both this country and in Australia, okay? Inhofe, probably the worst of them all, actually tried to get a federal crime for these climate scientists for potentially criminal behavior because he used federal money to do research in climate science, which he considers false, and therefore it's fraudulent, and therefore they're criminals. That's how he thinks, okay? If somebody remember Cuckoo Cuccinelli, the Attorney General of Virginia, doing all these really weird right-wing causes, including attacking Michael Mann, who was then at the University of Virginia, for his research and trying to get him kicked out on misuse of grant funds, all basically to feed the right-wing audience that followed him. If those of you old enough to remember the days of McCarthyism, this is very similar. Okay? And there's Mann's comment on it. Human-caused climate change is a reality. There are clearly some who find messaging inconvenient, and fortunately appear to be willing to adopt any tactics to try to suppress the message, okay, including death threats. So far, I haven't received one, but I'm not really surprised it happened at some point. Now, I'm going to add a little bit to this original talk. This is what I talked about at TAM 14 last year, 2014 last year. The last chapter of the book, something I wanted to really explore, is why? What is the thinking processes of the people who are doing this, who cannot face scientific reality? What goes on in the minds of science deniers? Okay? Why do they want to repeal reality? Okay? They cannot deal with the world as it is. Okay? And a step back a bit, this is a famous quote that was generated by some people I quoted in the book. If you go back to the French Enlightenment, in the days before the Revolution, okay? The aristocrats, of course they were all aristocrats, who were the pioneers of the French Enlightenment, Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, and this man, Marquis de Condorcet, who was a great believer. At this point now, the church was in retreat, rationalism was on the horizon, but Condorcet believed that the day would come when humans would be fully rational and not able to be influenced by irrational, non-logical things. Okay? That was his fervent hope. Sadly, didn't prove to be true, as you know, not only because the French Revolution was highly irrational, but he himself lost his head on the guillotine. Okay? And that, we now know, is a very, very bad description of how human thought works. Okay? Condorcet thought rationality would rule human society. Of course, didn't survive very long to find out. We are not rational machines. As Michael Shermer calls it, we are belief engines. Okay? Our mind is wired completely differently from a computer. Okay? We're wired in such a way that we create a worldview that we have framed to make ourselves comfortable, or a set of core beliefs. And anything we see that doesn't fit those core beliefs or worldview, we will find a way to bend it, twist it, or ignore it. And that's the way we are. Sorry to say, but you're not as rational as you think you are. No human escapes this. Okay? There's Michael's book, The Leading Brain. This is another excellent book by Will Stark called Unpersuadables. Okay? So we really can do like Alice in the Looking Glass. See right as left, black as white, right as wrong, straight out of Orwell, in other words. Humans are very good at this. We are very good at telling ourselves lies. Okay? And so what we have is this very small amount of rational rider here on our thought processes, but most of what we're doing is emotional and visceral, controlled by irrational, very basic instincts that we have. Okay? And we can only control it so much with our little rational brain on top of all this irrational that we have beneath. And I thought it was very appropriate to have an element as a symbol here. Okay? So we will always take a reassuring lie over an inconvenient truth. Or here we go, P is false, I will be sad. I do not wish to be sad, therefore P is true. There, 99% of all philosophical debates. So the psychologists call this motivated reasoning. Lots of different kind of categories of how we lie to ourselves. It's called motivated reasoning. I'll show you some of these. Cognitive dissonance, tribalism, confirmation bias, and I mentioned something of all these as well. Okay, cognitive dissonance. You haven't heard this term already. This is a big thing to be aware of. It's very common. Okay, people hold a core belief that's very strong. When they're presented with something that works against this belief, they cannot live with both simultaneously. Their brains can only hold the two at the same time for a certain amount of time, and it makes them uncomfortable. That's the dissonance part of it. Okay, and therefore they find some way to protect the core belief and rationalize, ignore, or explain away what doesn't fit. Okay, we do this all the time. We're really good at it. Okay? And F. Scott Fitzgerald himself went crazy late in life. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain that ability to function, which we are actually quite good at doing. Or John Maddox of Science Magazine, he was interviewing creationists over at Ken Ham's place. Watching creationist Jason Lisle try to reconcile the cutting edge of modern planetary physics with the offhand assertions of a religious tract written thousands of years ago by an unknown assortment of bearded semi-cave dwellers, I found myself wondering how long the poor chap has. Not to overdo the Fitzgerald, but shall think of the creationists often as day after day they beat on, boats against the currents of truth, borne back ceaselessly to be just completely, utterly wrong. Okay? So, this is what happens. We have a belief system, right? We smoke cigarettes, for example, and then we say, finding out smoke cigarettes is unhealthy, but I smoke. Unpleasant intention, two possible resolutions. Smoke cigarettes is unhealthy, so I stop smoking, which would be the smart one. But more often than not, research on smoking is not conclusive, so I keep on smoking. That's what we usually do. Okay? It's cognitive. This scientific fact contradicts the Bible, creationist version. The Bible must be literally true, their assumption, therefore science must be wrong. Right? They actually say this in so many words, many times. Okay? And of course, you know this. You've never dealt with a creationist. Right? It's a gut level thing. I cannot be related to apes or any other non-human, right? It scares the hell out of them. Right? It's very visceral. It doesn't matter how rational they are. Or they do this, right? They put on their creationist blinders and earplugs. Perfect your creationist beliefs in style. God-approved eye and ear guards blocks out 90% of all known science. Okay? Those of you who've seen this on YouTube before, you haven't, you should watch it only for a few minutes. It'll drive you crazy if you watch it too long. This is a creationist called Randy Wright, again associated with Ken Ham. And Richard Dawkins is interviewing her. And again, he points and shows her examples of transitional fossils. And she just keeps saying, transitional fossils don't exist. Every time. That's the way she deals with it, right? She doesn't look. Okay, that's cognitive dissonance. Same thing works with climate denial. Global warming constrains businesses, right? Their core belief is hardcore capitalism and often libertarianism. I believe in unrestrained capitalism, therefore science must be wrong. It's the same strategy of cognitive distance reduction. Okay? They want their world the way they want it, and it doesn't matter if they're going to die. It's the way they want to look at the world. Okay? Now, with cognitive dissonance comes another thing, and that's tribalism. We all know this story as well. Okay? We are a product of our cultures. Our beliefs come from our family, from our community. I mean, most of you are probably the black sheep in your families. I am. Okay? Because you broke away from what your culture and your family takes us for granted. Okay? We learn our worldview from our family and community. It's very hard to break against that. Most of you guys probably know what that struggle is like. Okay? All right? And especially when you're talking about religion. Right? This, certainly in this group is relevant. Anytime you're talking about your soul, your damnation, right? You're being tortured in hell. You know, your friends who can't get out of religion, even though they know there's problems with it, that's why they don't want to leave. They still believe that shit. Richard Dawkins points this out very nicely. The right religion is predicted by where you were born and raised, okay? In other words, the correct religion is all about culture, right? So if you're born and raised in North Africa, you're Muslim. If you're born and raised in these parts of the world, you're Christian. If you're born in these parts of the world, you're Buddhist, right? Because you were raised there, right? You predict your religion pretty much from where you're raised, okay? Or as Mark Twain always says it best, man is a religious animal. He's the only religious animal. He's the only animal that has a true religion, many of them. He's the only animal who loves his neighbor as himself and cuts the throat of his theologies and straight. Okay? So we have now this very strange clash, right? A tribal way of looking at things. And we have a very good example of a particular tribe, named the Republican Party, which is linked to all these things, including creationism, global warming, women who could shut down the rape pregnancies and other weird ideas. They all come together, okay? And they say, oh, well, my friend Michael Sherman will say this, and I'll get in a big argument with him. Oh, well, there's woo on the left and there's woo on the right. You know, they're all the same. No, bullshit, okay? There may be crazy ideas among left-wingers. I won't deny that. But not among the left-wing leadership and not among their party platforms, okay? There are individuals in the left wings who are odd and believe non-scientific ideas. But the left wing, the Democrat Party, does not promote anything that fits this description, okay? Only the GOP has adopted climate science denial as an official policy, right? On both the state level and the national level, okay? Only the GOP pushes creationism in public schools, right? Especially in schools like Louisiana, where the GOP has ran this down the rails, okay? Anti-vaxxers, surprisingly, you never say, oh, they're a bunch of lefty yuppies. No, actually, the numbers show that right-wingers are more likely to be anti-vax than left-wingers, okay? The woo on the left is not the official policy of its leaders. That's a difference. We don't push it. We have members who are crazy, but we don't push that. If you doubt me, okay, just look at the field of candidates Republicans have now put up in front of us for the last 8 years for the presidency. In 2008, every one of those guys who ran for president for the GOP was a climate denier, or at least on a version of it. All but 2 of them were hardcore creationists, and the other 2 were very wishy-washy. Okay, then in 2012, we got a bigger slate. Same story. They're either creationists or they're wishy-washy on evolution, and they were all climate deniers, except for John Huntsman, who was the exception in both cases. You know how far he got. Okay? All right, and now, not just the House Science Committee, which is 100% anti-scientist, a very strange thing, but now the Senate Science Committee, thanks to taking over the Senate, is the same way. It's run by crazies like James Inhofe. Okay, that's the party leadership. Researchers in psychology, for example, like Daniel Kane, have shown that there's very, very interesting sort of threads in the way people think and how they look at themselves, okay? Some people like, for example, focus on things like hierarchy. We like structure. We like having everything stable the way it always is, which is very conservative, as you might guess, right? And we focus on the individual. We don't like to worry about too much about the rest of society. And that tends to be people with that natural sort of tendency tend to be right-wingers. People on the left tend to be more interested in their fellow man, communitarians, okay? And tend to be more interested in equalizing the score rather than trying to work for the individual, okay? And you can look at people's views on lots of things and predict their party affiliation quite easily because of those underlying threads, okay? Another psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, has a very interesting study. It shows that we come up with very interesting things. For example, what matters the most to conservatives is things like authority versus subversion, loyalty versus betrayal, sanctity. These are things that really matter to them, and not so much to liberals. Okay? Liberals care about things that are more like care, fairness, and liberty versus oppression. Okay? Those things define us even before we have party labels. Okay? I found this on the internet the other day here, and I love this. Science builds our rational brain, but our beliefs are motivated largely by emotion. The biggest motivator is remaining tight with our peers. We're all in high school. We never left high school, right? We all want approval of our peers. This is Marsha McNutt, who now runs Science Magazine. People still need to fit in, and that need to fit in is so strong that local values, local opinions always trump science. And they will continue to trump science, especially when there's no clear downside to ignoring science. Right? So, we're talking about tribalism. People want to fit in. People want to believe what their friends believe. They do not want to be sticking out as a black sheep. Okay? And you all know this. It's very hard to pull people away from this, right? It's really hard to make people uncomfortable and stand out when they're the ones who don't agree with their peers. Okay? As you know, when you debate these guys, which I don't waste my time doing anymore, you're welcome to if you want to, but I won't do it anymore. Facts and evidence don't matter. You will never convince a creationist. You'll never convince a climate denier. They're not listening. They won't listen. Right? It's not an issue of rational debate anymore. Okay? For a creationist, right, a few facts of evolution that they may or may not concede is not going to change their beliefs because they're afraid of going to hell. That's far more powerful. Right? That's really scares your friends who are religious. Going to hell. Right? Not being saved. Right? That's a very powerful way to move people around. Okay? And so you know, the more you argue with them, often it's counterproductive. There's a very well-known thing called a backlash effect, where all they do is entrench their beliefs more and find more ways to argue against you because they're not changing their opinion. You're not going to change their minds. Okay? So it says this beautifully here. If your faith is big enough, facts don't count. That's religion in a nutshell, really, isn't it? No, well, that's a short song. So. And I love this. In denial, not Indiana, but in denial, Ham, builders of the fake ark. Of course, Duncan says, utter fake fucking shit. Holden says, if Blu-ray came from CDs, why are there still CDs? Made up, of course. And then a famous Roman philosopher who said this, which was picked up by the Roman Church of Pride, I believe because it's observed. Right? That's the proof of faith that you can believe in absurdities. Okay? Or here's our polar bears. Climate is a scam, it's a hoax, humans don't exist. Okay? So weighing evidence doesn't convict them, right? You can't get them to agree with you no matter how much evidence. So here's the evidence for evolution and the evidence for creationism, and say, see, they're equal weight, therefore they're equal footing in the classroom as he holds the scale of balance. And the metaphor works just as well with climate science. Here's virtually every scientist in the world versus this one climate denier that says either he's that dense or he doesn't believe in gravity either. Okay? So it's very predictable. What you are, what tribe you belong to, what you believe predicts what you're going to accept and not accept about science. Okay? Here's, for example, the probability of accepting certain ideas. In this case, it's talking about evolution. Human beings, we know that they developed early animals. Okay? People with low religiosity, high rate of acceptance, whether they're conservative or liberal. Okay? But high religiosity drops, no matter what political perspective, it drops, especially with conservatives. Okay? Not as big a difference, for example, in climate science. Right? It's only a smaller shift here. So low religiosity and high religiosity don't shift them that much because religion isn't a big part of climate science. It's sort of tacked on by accident. Okay? Have you never seen this before? This is one of the most scary things I've ever seen in my life. It gives me nightmares. Okay? This is a plot of belief in evolution, which is on this axis right here. The actual questions here if you want to read it. Versus GDP per capita, wealth of the nation. Okay? Here are the poor countries of Eastern Europe. Here are the richer countries of Central Europe and then Northern Europe, which are the best educated in the world. Acceptance of evolution there is 90 to 80%. Norway is up there as well. There's the US. We have the equivalent of Turkey or Cyprus in science literacy on this issue. And yet we spend more per capita per child in school than any country except maybe Norway. Yeah, this is averaged out.
Okay, so that means all the guys on the top that make $1 billion are being averaged out with all
Yes,
the guys.
right. This is the acceptance of evolution as an average over the whole society. Right? So this is how the brain works. It's getting a signal. Sir, same information conflicts with our core belief system. And then our powerful overriding circuit says, get rid of it. Okay? We are, by nature, unwilling to accept things that fit and don't fit our system. We will suppress, mislead, reject, or deny anything when it's scientific truth if it doesn't fit what we want to believe. So you guys ask me, okay, well, why is science different? Science is a belief system. We're just as diluted in the scientific community? No. Science has its own self-correcting features, okay, which is why we trust it, why we don't trust anything else. You put out testable hypotheses, you're constantly trying to prove them wrong, not right. Okay? That's how real science works. Okay? It's called falsification. No number of white swans will ever prove the statement all swans are white. But one black swan proves it wrong. And that's what science is about. You shoot down ideas, and then you start again. And only after an idea has not been shot down, after thousands of tests, you consider it well corroborated. We never talk about truth in science. There's no such thing. Okay? And the public doesn't know this. Okay? There's no final truth. We don't believe in science, we test. Okay? But the most important part of it, of course, individuals can be misled. The scientific community has purity. Right? You put out an idea, you try to publish an idea, the scientific community gets a chance to vote. And it has to pass scrutiny in every respect before it's published. And even then, it gets published, it may be scrutinized again for years before it's ever accepted or rejected. Right? No other system has that kind of quality control. Right? Used to have it in the media when they had fact checkers in the media who actually didn't allow lies to go on the news. Now Fox News lies all the time. Okay? So science works. It's different. Okay? As Neil says, when different experiments give you the same result, it's no longer subject to your opinion. That's the good thing about science. It's true whether or not you believe in it. That's why it works. Okay? Or Carl Sagan, at the heart of science, the central balance between two seemingly contradictory attitudes of openness to new ideas, no matter how bizarre counterintuitive they might be, and the most ruthless, self-skeptical scrutiny of all ideas, old and new. This is how deep truths are winnowed into deep nonsense. There we go. Says it all. Now, what's happened then is because science doesn't put up with bullshit, okay? We don't allow it to get through after a long enough time. We have a big problem because people love what science gives us, right? We have our cell phones and our computers and our remote controls and all these other nice things that science and technology give us. We're all living probably longer than we would have lived, If you had lived a century and a half ago, you'd be dead by now. Okay? Think about it. Okay? And yet, we reject science anytime it tells something we don't want to hear. Inconvenient truths. Right? Al Gore's movie title is very appropriate. Okay? The creationists, of course, reject evolution because of religion. The club deniers because they're usually hardcore conservatives, pro-business, libertarians. They fear government more than they fear business, and they don't want to hamper business. That's their ideology that drives them. Okay? But science is telling us inconvenient truths. And the thing about it is, as a scientist myself, I know this in fact, we're not killjoys. We don't like telling you bad news. Okay? It doesn't profit us to tell you that the climate is going to go to hell. Okay? There is no upside for us to do that. In fact, there's a lot of downsides. Okay? Because it's not profitable, it doesn't get you more grant dollars. There's no reason we would tell you it unless the data require us to. Okay? So if a scientist is telling you something you don't want to hear, it's not because they don't like telling you, that good news, it's because there isn't a choice. This little cartoon says it very nicely here. Some of you remember the story of Archimedes, famous 5th century Hellenistic mathematician and engineer. He was working away in Syracuse when the Romans besieged the city. They gave orders for him to be captured alive because he was the most brilliant man on the planet at the time. And a Roman soldier didn't know who he was. As he was drawing his geometry circles in sand, he cut his head off. Okay? Or as some of you know, Giovanni Bruno, about 1600 AD. Oh, about that whole earth revolving around the sun thing, maybe we just talk about it? I am not a monkey's cousin. Get thee behind me, Charles. I mean, Satan. Okay? If I could be in travel on the beam of light. Albert, stop daydreaming in class. You'll never amount to anything. And then the battle against the Large Hadron Collider, which of course discovered the Higgs boson last year. Okay? Science, if you ain't pissing people off, you ain't doing it. Right? That's the nature of what we do. We are not here to tell you propaganda. We're not here to do PR. We're here to tell you the truth. Okay? Or I like this cartoon. I think they should have hospitals for creationists here. Only treated with prayer. Isn't that medical scientific stuff? Yes. In other words, they like what science gives them, but they not the questions that science asks. Okay. This is a really long quote here. I just don't cut it out for time reasons here. He's talking about this ways in which people are resisting science. I'm of course talking about denial. The anti-vax movement, like climate change denial, rests on the assumption if you disagree with certain established scientific results, you can just ignore them. You call the science lies or claim the science has political bias. But you can't really fool Mother Nature. Okay? Infections spread with well-understood mathematical patterns. Plants respond to changes in atmospheric conditions with the law of physics and chemistry. They do this in spite of who we vote for. Okay? They do this in spite of our political or social beliefs about right or wrong, good or bad. The world, in other words, has its own ways. Denial can't change that. What the Disneyland outbreak makes clear is that science denial has consequences. This is the real news here. The anti-vax and climate skeptic strains of science denial have been with us for more than a decade. Up to now, however, it's all seemed a bit theoretical. Now along comes an outbreak of a once-beaten disease, and surprise, we suddenly realize science has real-world consequences because of an actual real world, the one humans invented science to describe. Okay? And so it is very much a pill that no one can seem to swallow. Okay? Or for those of you who remember this movie, you can't handle the truth. All right. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. You can't change those things, right? You can't make it what you want it to be. It's going to be the way it is, and science is the only true way to have it. This was going to be a YouTube link I was going to play for a famous 1970s chiffon margarine commercial that those older members of this audience remember, where they fooling Mother Nature by putting chiffon margarine on the bread instead of butter. And at the very end of the commercial, the innocent-looking lady playing Mother Nature suddenly gets mad. The sky goes dark, the thunder rattles, and said, "You can't fool Mother Nature."
Not nice.
It's not nice anymore. Thank you. That's why I wanted to play the original clip. It was censored by the library's R-rated filter. Okay. Or here, Colbert, now no longer doing his show anymore. What do you think would have surprised Carl Sagan most about what has changed in our knowledge of the universe since his death in '96? And Tyson was once a student, as you know. I think what would surprise him most of all, we still have to argue that science is something important to society. That's what surprised me most. We've actually seen the point now where science has been so attacked, so degraded, that 40% of the population basically doesn't think we're telling them the truth. Okay? So, what do you do about this? You guys are the activists, okay? You're the ones who go out on street corners and shout, which is good, okay? What kinds of things things can you do? And especially when you get into individual debates with creationists or climate deniers. I gave you some of the evidence earlier, and you're welcome to my pamphlet there if you want to look at it. You all know that arguing with them is a waste of time unless you're just doing it for entertainment, which I don't have time for anymore. I did my share of debating creationists. I'm not doing it again. I debated Dwayne Gish and beat him. I debated a couple of other guys. That's once only for each of them. That's it. Okay. And what I found when I wrote my 2007 evolution book, some of you know, okay, was the creationists never knew it existed. Right. It never showed up on their web traffic. Right. There were no comments on it whatsoever for like 2 years after it was published. They never look at anything that isn't in their already, part of their world. I watched the Amazon reviews coming in, right? You look at the review string on Amazon, who reads your book, and every once in a while you get a creationist troll in there who says something, but it's very few. And the majority of the reviews I got, and I got a bunch of mail and email, people telling me this, were fence sitters. People who had heard about evolution in high school but misunderstood it, and they were raised in a Christian family, but they weren't so sure. They're the ones you want to reach. Okay? People who are not too sure, okay? Because they can be reached. And when you reach them persuasively without threatening them, which means you don't try to relate religion right up front, wait for a little on that, okay? As you know, at the beginning of my book, I have that disclaimer at the front where I'm an accommodationist. I say, okay, well, there are lots of religious people, including the Pope and 10,000 people in the Clergy Letter Project, right? That disarms that argument right away. And then you get to them with evidence, which my book apparently did, okay? So you try to reach the fence sitters. You try not to advocate as a partisan, right? Although I know you love to wear your inflammatory t-shirts, and there's places for that too. Okay? But if you want to debate somebody in a context where you win them over, try not to put your atheist label up front first. Try just to argue what do they understand and don't understand before you reveal what you think. Right? Let them do the talking, and then something work around it. And then a famous statement Phil Plait made, the most famous at TAM a few years ago, don't get it. Okay? Tone is everything, right? If you're respectful, at least at the beginning, on a person who isn't convinced, but isn't also a denier, you have a chance. You have a chance to work with them, okay? You want people to listen, you gotta listen to them. Okay? Don't belittle them or you lose them, okay? You don't try to win over those haters. Because you're not a jackass whisperer. As Carl says again, and Carl was very good at being gentle about this. Okay? People are not stupid. They believe things for a reason. The last right for skeptics to get intelligent, bright, curious, intellectual people is to belittle or condescend or show arrogance toward the beliefs. That's a very hard thing for us to do, but that's what you have to do. You want to win hearts and minds. You watch what Bill Nye did a year ago on January 4th. Okay? He didn't attack Ken Ham directly. He didn't make it a personal thing like it's so typical on debates. It's very hard for me not to be personally insulted by what they say. Okay? What did he do? He just let Ken Ham hang himself. Right? Remember? He let Ken Ham say ridiculous shit. And then he would say, well, think about that, Ken. This kind of thing doesn't make any sense. Because he was talking to the audience outside the room. Right? Trying to convince the people who were not hardcore, who could actually be reached. And he was being gentle and being persuasive and non-threatening and not condescending at all. And apparently he blasted Ken Ham. I mean, even Pat Robertson thought Ken Ham was beaten down. Okay? That's the way to do it. Okay? That was a very good example of how to do it right. Okay? Now, by now you must be thoroughly depressed. I'm sure you would be. I am sometimes as well. There actually are signs of hope. There really are. Believe me or not, there are signs of hope. Now, I thought, now 35 years of battling creationists, it never goes away. They're always in my hair. I'm always fighting a rearguard action, and I can never seem to see any change in their popularity. But actually, it is changing, okay? If you look at the polls lately, it's the youngest generation, the millennials, the 20-somethings, and some of the older ones, who are very quickly turning away against not just creationism, but all right-wing causes. Because they've grown up as a generation that's fairly comfortable with feminism and homosexuality and things like that. And they've seen what happens when the right-wingers gain power. They do crazy things. And that scared the hell out of the generation of millennials. You guys who are younger in this room, under 35, vote overwhelmingly for positions that are anti-racist, anti-homophobic, and pro-woman. Okay? Unfortunately, not in the elections like last November when nobody showed up. But believe me, if there's a good candidate in 2016, there will be a big turnaround. Okay? All right? So what does reduce religious fundamentalism? You've had Phil Zuckerman speak to you before, right?
Yep, twice.
You all know what he says. He's been to Denmark and much of other Scandinavia. What reduces fundamentalism? Socialism, right? Social safety net, right? People don't worry about God when they've got cradle to grave, job security, retirement, unemployment, healthcare, childcare, paid vacations. They don't need religion. And as you know, most of Scandinavia is non-religious now, or just about 95% non-religious. Scary for many people in this country, but that's what works, okay? That's my point there. So here's the importance of religion by generation. The old generation, the greatest generation they call it here, the World War II generation up here, 75% in red. My generation is the boomers, which are down here in brown, okay? And then the next generation down here, the Gen Xers, look at, they're down to about 50% religious. Here's the data point for the millennials at the start of this. 40% religious. Not 75%, 40%. Now you guys, of course, are the exception, whatever generation you're part of. But the millennials in this room, you young people, you're the future. You guys are going to change this. It may not be next 2 elections, but by the next 10 elections, it'll be all gone. It's kind of crazy shit that Republicans have been doing, okay? And again, here's the millennials. This is percentage of the generation of religious, right? Millennials averaging about 30 to 40% non-religious, okay? And then silent generation is the other extreme. Or even Hispanics, which were raised Catholic. Giant drop in religiosity among Hispanics. And most of them are just unaffiliated now, okay? And what's the reason? Well, lots of reasons. This certainly helps. Every time we have a meeting like this, every time I go to TAM in Las Vegas, you have a community. When I grew up in Glendale, I knew no other person, many of you probably the same way, no other person who thought like I did. The internet crosses boundaries. Right? And then communities that arise like yours, you have now people who agree with you. And you're not obligated to agree with your parents, your family, your neighborhood, because you have a different community. Okay? Now, there's another thing you have to be careful of, and that is they say, oh, well, the Gallup poll says that 40-some-5% or whatever of Americans are creationists. That's a lie. Okay? It's very distorted because the Gallup poll question is one of the worst examples of poll questions ever written. If you do research on how to write poll questions, it's got 3 or 4 different complicated parts in the 3 choices you give. And they all, 2 of them are not religious answers, 1 non-religious. So it automatically forces everybody who's the least bit religious into one of the 2 creationist positions. It's the worst shitty poll you've ever seen in your life. But they don't change the question because they're using it in a long-term study, so they can't change the question or it'll change the data. But it means nothing. It's completely garbage. Okay? If you break it down by components of different parts of creationism, right? Only 14% of Americans believe in a young Earth, right? Ken Ham's crowd is very tiny. Okay? They are not anywhere close to 40% of Americans that believe in a young Earth. Okay? Various polls showed about 30 to 40% of Americans agrees that animals and plants evolve. They like the idea of evolution, just not them. Okay? You just don't bring humans in, they'll be happy with it. Okay? You know, Ken Ham doesn't even agree plate tectonics is real. Of course, most Americans, 80% agree with that. Okay? Again, here's the number of godless overall is growing. 12% of the whole population, 40% of the younger generation. And the way that people have viewed the Bible, the literalist view, the actual word of God taken literally, down 9% since 1984. Okay, where it's an ancient book of fables, recorded by man, up 9%. Look how much we've gained. We're up 21% here, and the literalists are 28%. We're almost at parity with them. And then the rest of Americans are in the wishy-washy middle, which hasn't changed. Okay? And it has consequences as well, right? Creation is found unlikely support among students in China and India. Yes, in America, we very much like if you teach children religious dogmas instead of science. We'd like your jobs. Okay. Now, climate change denial is also undergoing change. Okay, it's not as bad as it sounds like when you listen to the public debate. Okay, especially right after Hurricane Sandy, right before the 2012 election, 80% of Americans agreed climate's changing. Those polls I showed you earlier are out of date now. Okay, the hardcore climate deniers are really only about 10 or 20%. Okay, however, they happen to be the leadership of the GOP and their most powerful people like the Koch brothers. Okay. As we said, climate's not weather, but it's unusual things like an unusual weather event like Hurricane Sandy, which shifts the needle really fast. All of it's either talking till we're blue in the face, no change. Hurricane Sandy, bang, change. Okay? It's one of the weird ironies. okay? And we're the only country in the world, only industrialized country in the world that has anywhere near this much climate denial, okay? The current Prime Minister of Australia is about to lose his job, and he's a climate denier, and that leaves only Tony Harper in Canada, who's still a climate denier, okay? All right, and so if you break America down, people alarmed about climate, concerned about climate, cautious about climate, where's really much percentage bigger, and then here's the dismissive and doubtful ones. They're tiny percentages, especially this is the youngest generation right here, okay? And it's all, of course, about partisan divides. You know, if you're a Republican, much more likely, but you notice the age differences here. Even millennial Republicans are more accepting of climate than anyone else, okay? In fact, that's what the polls are saying. Even majority Republicans accept climate change. Republicans, okay? So it's just their leadership, the rich donors who are calling the shot. Their rank and file don't follow them down the hole necessarily, okay? All right, and again, comparing to other countries, there's the U.S.'s opinion on climate change, the worst in the world, and there's the climate deniers in red. And look at all these other countries way ahead of us on the scientific issues here. In China, Argentina, Italy. They're eating our lunch, by the way, economically in some cases, thanks to science denial. Okay? So the day is coming, and it probably will come pretty soon, when the last climate change denier will step off the last melted iceberg that won't be gone. Okay? So finally, the whole thing really revolves around what really matters. What do people actually do? Not what they say in noisy places like the public media. What do people who really actually have to make hard decisions do? Okay, and you find climate denial doesn't really change things when it comes to that. Okay? Talking about insurance companies. They're not liberal institutions by any stretch of the imagination. But insurance companies have to deal with real problems and real losses and real money. And all the insurance companies and the big reinsurers like Swiss Re, German Re, they have to be realistic about how they're going to lose money and what they're going to lose money in climate changes. They can't afford to be ideologues. So they are very much accepting climate change and planning for it. The U.S. military, now that's not what you call a liberal institution. The U.S. military is planning for climate change. Although the Congress tried to stop them for a while, but it hasn't actually happened. Okay? My brother-in-law is in emergency management. Even though they may have state elected officials, political appointees who don't agree with climate change, the people who actually do the real work are dealing with climate change. Okay? People that can't afford to be ideologues. Okay? Turns out, except for the energy-related companies like the Koch brothers and ExxonMobil, the biggest corporation in the world is GE. They're planning for climate change. Most of the big corporations are. Okay? They've got a bottom line. They have to survive. They can't afford to be ideological. Right? They have to be earning profit. Okay? And so what's happening is because we are politically stuck in the past, European and Asian countries are moving way ahead of us in technology for the green planet, especially China. Right? They're eating our lunch as far as developing green technologies and implementing them. We're going to be buying it from them thanks to the climate deniers. Okay? We could have developed it ourselves, but we didn't. Okay? And so you have to approach it a different way, right? Scientists have been yelling for years, climate change threatens our existence, no response. Climate change threatens our economy, bang, get your attention. Okay, and that's what does really change. Okay? And one more time about the millennials. This is how the percentage of millennials stack up on all these various polling questions, like gay marriage, abortion, and so on. But at the top here, require utilities to use a third of the power from renewables, reduce carbon pollution, and so on. Millennials, 70 to 80% in agreement, either strongly or somewhat in favor. Right? Another 2 or 3 election cycles, you guys, 20-somethings and 30-somethings, will be in power. And you will be able to fix the damage that my generation fucked up. My parents' generation. Okay? So, it says it very nicely here. Here we are, talking about energy independence, conserving rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, little things, all of these things which we all agree we really would not like to have. Okay? And then someone says, what is a big hoax to create a better world for nothing? Okay? Or again, Carl Sagan, it's far better to grasp the universe as it really is than persistent delusion, however satisfying and reassuring. Or to finish with Isaac Asimov, another of my favorites. So the universe is not quite the way you thought it was. You better rearrange your beliefs then. Because you certainly can't rearrange the universe. Okay, thank you.
Enough about 10, 15 minutes at most, and that's if we can get some help after the Q&A to put some chairs away.
Quick
For
questions
some
then,
questions.
quick questions,
But
yes.
please, let's go. You.
Are you surprised that only like 1 to 2% of scientists were able to be bought off by oil and coal companies?
Surprised that they were,
Or are you surprised that only 1 or 2%?
Oh.
It doesn't seem like there should be more that were able to be bought off?
Well, because what they bought off is people who aren't close to the climate science data. And they bought a random geophysicist or a random astronomer or something like that. And those people, you know, they have ideology that already can be bought, and that's not so easy. I don't know if anyone actually works at climate data that's sold out.
So are scientists not easily bought then?
I hope so. Okay? Yeah, another question. Yeah,
Why is the Arctic warming at a faster rate than now?
because it floats.
Because what?
It floats. It's sea ice. Okay? The Antarctic sits on a solid continent, which is thermally more stable. Takes a lot longer to melt that ice. Although it's actually melting really fast. You have probably heard the latest, but it's melting much faster. Okay, but the Arctic sits on water, right? And the Arctic floats, and water is warming up. The oceans all over the world are warming up. So it's based on something that's below it that's not freezing anymore. And so it's melting faster. Okay? Simple answer. It's actually pretty complicated, but that's the
Kathy.
version. Yes?
Do you think that the Koch brothers and others like them really believe in their supposed philosophy, or are they just doing that so they can keep making money by going with the oil?
Both. Basically, Koch brothers' parents, if you read about their history, were John Birchers, very powerful John Birchers. And they were very hardcore, anti-communist, pro-capitalist, anti-anything that wasn't big capitalist. Okay, because they got their money from rich parents, right? That's how all rich people get rich. Their parents were rich. Okay? All right, and so they already had a hard, and then they're also big Ayn Rand fans, big, you know, libertarian, and it's hardcore there. So this is their core philosophy. I don't think there's any question about that. But yes, economically, it's to their advantage if we do not pass any climate change legislation, because that does affect their company. So they are going to fight hard with it. And they're the biggest spender of all the various mega millionaires who influence policy in this country right now. And did you see the news last week? They're planning on spending some $800 million just on the GOP presidential elections, you know, to pick their candidate, right? Last week, all the GOP presidential candidates came to the Koch brothers and kissed their asses, right? Because the Koch brothers are going to pick the next presidential candidate from that party. Simple as that. Okay.
Ross.
Okay.
Do you think it's possible for us to actually reverse the effects of climate change within our lifetime or our children's lifetime?
Most of the people I know in the climate committee who work on that say no. Okay, that we've already tipped the balance, and already is unstoppable. There are things that can be done to make it less bad. Okay, and there are all sorts of mad scientist engineering solutions out there that can do things. But the big problem with those is we don't really know, because these are complicated systems, whether if we say sprinkle a lot of reflective material on the North and South Pole, decrease the amount of sunlight going out, which is called increasing the albedo, that would chill the planet. But if we did too much, push it to the next ice age. Okay, so it's very delicate. And every time you hear an engineer or geoengineer saying, "Well, let's do this, the thing that usually holds it up, number one, of course, is money, and number two is we really don't know enough about the system to know where to stop and how to really make it work. We can estimate it, but we are really afraid if somebody does it and it goes wrong, we're worse off than we started. So that's part of the reason for inaction. But as far as can we go back to the way it was when you and I were born? No, never going to happen. Okay, we're already past that. The world shot way past the tipping point on CO2 years ago. 400 was like the magic threshold, but it was already past years before that. So the issue is how are we going to live with this world that we've screwed up? And that's going to be a challenge. Okay. That's what we should be debating, is how to make it work. Okay, who's the next one?
Haley.
Would you equate the anti-GMO crowd to the anti-vax crowd?
There is an element there that is purely science and irons. Okay, in other words, a lot of people who just say chemicals bad, right? And that's because they don't understand basic science. And so most GMO products I think are fine. Okay, they've been tested thousands of times. And good grief, no product you eat in the grocery store is actually natural, right? They're all taking the wild things that have been hybridized and bred to be what they are today. Okay, so in that sense, there isn't anything that isn't genetically modified. But the way in which we modify it now, there are ways it can go wrong. But I would say the small amounts of risks are worth it for the benefits they provide. And so that's another question. Yes, GMO denial tends to be dominantly a left-wing position, but it isn't the position of anyone running the Democratic Party or the major politicians. That's the difference, okay?
One, maybe two more questions. One right there, and then one more. Then that's it. And let me make an announcement before you go. We are going to be having dinner at the Old Spaghetti Factory for those of you who signed up on the meetup for that. Our space is limited,
There's one spot.
and there's one spot available. I would talk to,
You give my spot away too, right?
yeah, 2 spots available. And I will have one more announcement about the Friday Superstition Bash, but let's finish those 2 questions first.
Okay, who's next?
And please, thank you.
So when should we start evacuating Florida?
The first symptom is actually, before that, you're going to start seeing giant hurricanes going on land in a way they've never done before, because sea level's higher, and then you get sea level plus, say, a high tide, and you have what's called storm surge. And the best example of that was Sandy, 2012, right? Sandy washed way ashore in New Jersey and Long Island, where no one had ever seen hurricanes hit before. In fact, it was unusual to have a hurricane that far north, except they got Irene 2 years earlier. I was there, okay? And that's the first sign. It's going to be big hurricanes washing ashore. And then it's going to get more obvious, because that's the first time the sea water starts washing on, you're going to start losing things, right? You wash away coastal communities, the salt will contaminate all the coastal agriculture and kill the plants. That will start to do it. And then, you know, the sea level rise by the end of this next century, it'll be enough to drown most of Florida and much of the low-lying world, right? That's what we're looking at. And there's no way to sugarcoat that.
Last question.
To me, I mean, it shocked me when I was looking at the list of countries how the USA was so far behind.
Yeah.
To believe in climate change, you said China is at like one of the top, and they're what
Right,
kind of,
because the government has no political ideology
Right.
for religion or for climate denial.
well, what kind of technologies and what kind of things is China doing to create eco-friendly
Well,
products?
they're sort of playing a mixed bag, okay? They're creating more power plants run by coal, which is the worst thing you can do.
So they're
they have
creating more that's worse.
But they're also looking at technologies to both minimize the damage that they know they're creating and to get a corner on the market, because they can then make it cheaper than anyone else as well. And what they've been doing lately is they've been going to all these developing world countries and buying up their resources, because they're now rich enough to do that the way we used to do it. All right, so now they're in a position to corner markets and do things. In fact, certain markets, for example, they already have the world in a lock grip. So if you want rare earth elements to build technology, to build electronics, the Chinese have most of it. We have one mine in the entire U.S. up there by Vegas, okay? And they were holding Japan hostage last year, if you paid attention to the news. Japan couldn't make any electronics because the Chinese were cutting their rare earth element supplies. They're required to make fancy chips. So they are in that position already. Just a question of how much they can make it go forward and how much they still have to do stuff like coal power plants for the people who are choking to death, by the way. I've seen my friends in Beijing tell me it's even worse than you see on the news. Okay?
One last announcement. Next Friday, which is Friday the 13th, come celebrate the Frigatriscadectophobia. How could I not say what you do when I can say that? With the Backyard Skeptics, and it is at the
It's at Howard Johnson.
Howard Johnson. Oh yeah, the Howard Johnsons in Orange County. Come by, support it. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a big bash. And please, one more big round of applause.
Anybody's interested in t-shirts, otherwise I'm packing them
T-shirts
up.
are up there.
Oh, right.